When I found the notebook, it wasn't hidden under the bed or locked away in some drawer I never touched. It was right there, sitting beside his side of the bed, as if it belonged there, as if it deserved to be near me. I remember the sound it made when I opened it, a soft rustle, the kind that shouldn't mean anything. But in that moment, it felt like the sound of my world splitting in half. His handwriting was familiar, slanted, and deliberate. I used to love it. I'd tease him about how he wrote like someone who had secrets. I just never knew how right I was. Each line on that page was a lie. Not one that he'd told already, but ones he was planning to tell. If you had met me 2 years earlier, you'd have seen a woman who thought she had finally done everything right. My name is Lauren Bennett, and for most of my marriage, I believed love could fix anything if you just held on long enough. I met Adam in college. He was the quiet type, the kind of man who always seemed to be thinking, weighing his words before speaking. He wasn't the life of the party, but when he looked at you, it felt like the rest of the world faded away. We married at 28, bought a modest house in a quiet neighborhood outside Portland, and built a life that looked perfectly ordinary from the outside. 2 kids, Eli, who was 8, and Emma, 6, both loud and endlessly curious. Our home always smelled of coffee and cinnamon in the mornings. I worked part-time at the local library, and Adam ran a small construction company. He left early, came home late, and most nights, he'd fall asleep on the couch, watching baseball, with a half-empty mug of coffee by his side. I used to think that's what marriage was. Quiet routines, the hum of ordinary love, the comfort of the same pair of shoes by the door, until the day I realized those shoes had walked somewhere they didn't belong. It started small. One evening, he came home smelling like perfume, not the kind I wore, something floral and sharp. I remember teasing him, "Who've you been hugging today?" He laughed it off, kissed my forehead, and said, "Just Mrs. Linton from the office. She wears that strong stuff." I didn't think much of it then. I wanted to trust him. Trust was supposed to be the foundation of marriage, wasn't it? But over the next few weeks, little cracks began to show. He'd get texts late at night, and his phone, once left carelessly on the counter, was now always face down. He started showering as soon as he came home, saying the construction sites made him feel grimy. And one night, when I walked into the living room, I found him staring at his phone with that small, private smile, the one he used to have only for me. When I asked what he was looking at, he jumped. "Just a meme," he said too quickly. I laughed then, but something in me turned cold. I remember lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling fan turning slow circles, feeling a silence I didn't know how to name. I wasn't sure if I was losing my mind or my marriage, maybe both. I tried to dismiss it, told myself I was imagining things. Adam had been stressed, the business was struggling, the kids were demanding, life was heavy. I started waking up early just to watch him leave. I'd see the way he checked his reflection before heading out, the faint smell of cologne he'd never used before. And one morning, I caught a glimpse of a pink envelope in his truck, sitting on the passenger seat. It could have been anything, a bill, a note, a mistake. But when I asked him about it later that evening, he said, "What envelope?" That's when I knew something was wrong. The confrontation came 2 weeks later. It wasn't dramatic, not at first. We were eating dinner, the kids already in bed. I'd made lasagna, his favorite, hoping that maybe, if I made things feel normal, they'd become normal again. But halfway through the meal, I looked up and asked quietly, "Adam, are you seeing someone?" He froze. His fork hovered midair, and for a long time, he didn't move. Finally, he said, "What?" "No, Lauren. Why would you even ask that?" His voice was calm, but his eyes, they were different, defensive, closed off. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But something in me had already seen the truth in his hesitation, in that practiced tone. I spent the next few nights awake, waiting for him to fall asleep before checking his phone. He had changed his password. That was when my hands started trembling, not from anger, but from the slow realization that I was becoming someone I didn't recognize, the kind of woman who didn't trust her husband. And then, one afternoon, while doing laundry, I found the receipt that broke me. A hotel room, downtown. 2 nights. I confronted him again that evening, my hands shaking as I held the paper. He didn't deny it this time. He looked at me for a long moment, his face pale, and said quietly, "Her name is Melissa. It's over, Lauren. It's been over for weeks. I swear to you." I remember feeling the air leave my body, not from rage, from disbelief. He reached out, tried to take my hand, but I stepped back. All I could say was, "Why?" He told me he'd felt unseen, unappreciated, that he didn't mean for it to happen, that it was just talking at first. that he needed someone to listen. I stood there, staring at the man I had shared my life with, and for the first time, I didn't recognize him. But against every instinct screaming inside me, I forgave him. Not because I was weak, but because I believed people could change. Because I wanted my children to grow up in a home where love didn't break at the first crack. Because I thought forgiveness could build something new. I was wrong. For a while, I told myself things were getting better. After the confrontation, Adam promised me over and over that it was over. He deleted her number, shut down that quiet arrogance that had crept into his voice, and said all the right things. We even started therapy. He showed up on time, brought coffee for me before each session, and nodded when the counselor talked about trust and rebuilding. I wanted to believe it. I really did. At night, I'd lie awake beside him, watching the rise and fall of his chest. Sometimes, I'd reach out and touch his arm gently, almost like I was checking if he was still real. He'd stir, half asleep, and murmur, "I'm here, Lauren. I'm not going anywhere." And for a few fleeting seconds, I believed him. Life began to resemble something normal again. Eddie's laughter returned to the dinner table. Emma started sleeping through the night, and I caught myself humming while folding laundry, small signs of peace trying to return. On weekends, Adam took the kids out for ice cream or fishing by the river. He started cooking dinner once a week, spaghetti with jarred sauce. Always too much salt, but plenty of effort. He even began leaving little sticky notes on the fridge. "Love you, honey. Thanks for not giving up on me." I'd find them in my lunch bag, in the car, once even inside the book I was reading. And each time, my heart softened a little. Maybe we were healing. Maybe forgiveness wasn't foolish after all. Then one evening, something small, something almost silly, made my chest tighten again. It was a Tuesday. The kids were upstairs, and Adam was sitting at the kitchen table, tapping on his phone. He said he was texting a client about a project delay. "Who's the client?" I asked casually. He looked up, just a second too slow. Eric. Eric Turner. Eric Turner had retired last year." I didn't say anything, just smiled and nodded. But inside, something old and cold started to stir again. Later that night, while folding towels, I found a business card in his jeans pocket. It was for Rowan Accounting Services, Melissa's firm. I didn't confront him this time. I'd learned what happened when you did. They lied better the second time around. Instead, I waited, watched, listened. He started working later again. Some nights, he'd come home smelling faintly of the same perfume I remembered from before. When I'd ask how his day went, he'd say, "Exhausting," and kiss me on the forehead like I was a child he needed to pacify. I stopped sleeping. Every noise in the house became a question mark. Every message ping became a small wound. And yet, I still wanted to be wrong. I still wanted to believe he was trying. Then came the notebook. It was a Saturday morning. Adam had taken the kids to the park, and I was changing the sheets. When I pulled open his nightstand drawer to grab a pair of earplugs, I saw it, a black leather notebook, the kind he used for work. For a moment, I hesitated. My heart pounded in my throat. I told myself, don't do it. Don't be that woman again. But curiosity, or maybe instinct, took over. The first page looked harmless. Dates, initials, project notes. But a few pages in, the handwriting shifted. The tone changed. "Dinner with M, if Lauren asks. Say it was a late client meeting. New cologne. Don't wear it at home. Erase messages before Friday. Buy flowers, guilt control." My fingers went numb. He wasn't writing memories. He was writing plans. Lies. Excuses. Alibis. There were dates stretching back months, even after therapy. Notes about conversations we'd had, rewritten to fit a different version of reality. Each word was a betrayal with ink instead of voice. I don't remember sitting down, but when I looked up, I was on the floor, the notebook open across my lap. I could smell the faint trace of his cologne on its cover, the same scent I'd once loved. When they came back from the park, I was still sitting there, the notebook on the table between us. He froze when he saw it. His eyes flicked from the book to my face, and I saw it, that brief flash of calculation before the mask slipped on again. "Lauren," he said softly, "you weren't supposed to." "Supposed to what, Adam?" I interrupted, my voice calm but trembling. "Supposed to keep believing your stories?" He reached for the notebook, but I pulled it closer. "You wrote them down," I said, almost whispering. "You actually wrote them down. Every lie, every excuse, every—" "It's not what you think," he said quickly, stepping closer. It was a coping thing. The therapist suggested journaling. Don't. I said, standing now. Don't insult my intelligence with that. The air between us was heavy, thick with something that used to be love but had turned into something brittle, something sour. Eli peeked around the corner from the hallway. Eyes wide. I softened my voice instantly. Go to your room, sweetheart. He hesitated but obeyed. When I turned back, Adam was already picking up his keys. Where are you going? I asked. He looked at me just once, and it was enough. To think, he said, and walked out. That night, he didn't come home. For the first time since we'd married, I locked the door from the inside. I sat at the kitchen table, the notebook beside me, flipping through every page until the ink started to blur with tears. There were names, initials, hotel addresses, even backup lies for conversations he hadn't had yet. It wasn't just cheating. It was strategy. He hadn't been trying to rebuild anything. He'd been rehearsing. When dawn came, I poured myself a cup of coffee and stared out the window at the empty driveway. I realized forgiveness meant nothing to a man who saw it as permission. That morning, I knew something inside me had shifted for good. I wasn't going to scream or beg or chase him anymore. I was going to end this carefully, quietly, and on my own terms. The next few days felt like walking through fog. Adam didn't come home that night, or the night after. He texted me once a simple message that read, I just need some space, Lauren. Don't make this worse than it already is. Worse than it already is. Those 5 words stayed with me like a bruise that wouldn't fade. I didn't reply. Instead, I looked around the house that morning, at the breakfast plates still in the sink, at Emma's crayons scattered across the counter, at Eli's shoes by the door, and realized something simple and terrifying. This house was no longer ours. It was mine. For the first time in years, I stopped waiting for him. No dinners kept warm in the oven. No texts asking when he'd be home. No pretending. I dropped the kids off at school, then drove straight to the small law office downtown. The woman who greeted me was in her 50s, kind eyes behind square glasses. Her name was Margaret Hill, family law attorney. I told her everything about the affair, the supposed therapy, the notebook. When I finished, she sat quietly for a long moment, then said softly, Lauren, do you have any idea how valuable that notebook might be? I shook my head. She smiled sadly. It's not just evidence of infidelity. It's premeditation. He documented deception. You have every right to protect yourself. Her words steadied me. For the first time since this began, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, control. When I got home that afternoon, the house was silent, except for the ticking clock in the hallway. I sat at the table and began scanning every page of that notebook, one by one. My hands shook, but I didn't stop. I uploaded them to a folder on my laptop, titled For Me. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was clarity, a record of the truth in his own handwriting. When I finished, I slipped the original notebook back into the drawer where I'd found it exactly how it was. Then I waited. 3 days later, he came home. It was late past midnight. I heard the door open, the hesitant footsteps down the hallway. I didn't move from the couch. I just said, You can sleep in the guest room. He sighed, dropped his bag. Lauren, please, we don't have to do this right now. Oh, I think we do, I said quietly. Unless you have somewhere else to be. He stared at me then, eyes tired but hard. You went through my things. Again. I laughed not cruelly, just brokenly. He rubbed his temples, muttering, It wasn't what it looked like. Stop, I said, standing up. Please, stop. You've lied enough for a lifetime. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Guilt, fear, or maybe just annoyance that he'd been caught again. Lauren, he said finally, you think you're the only one who's been unhappy? You think this marriage hasn't been suffocating for me too? I took a step back. If you were unhappy, you could have talked to me. You didn't have to. Document your betrayal. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. I've spoken to an attorney. That shut him up. For a second, I saw something break in his eyes, that illusion of control he'd always carried. You did what? He asked. I'm filing, I said calmly. I'll make sure you get time with the kids, but this is over. He looked at me as if I'd struck him. Then, almost softly, he said, You'll regret this. Maybe, I replied. But I'll regret staying more. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled on the wall. The next morning, I told the kids. Eli stared at his cereal for a long time, then asked, Did Dad do something bad? I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. Dad made some mistakes, sweetheart. But we're going to be okay. Emma, only 6, asked quietly, Will he still read us bedtime stories? I forced a smile. Of course. You'll still see him. When they went off to school, I cried. Not because I wanted Adam back, but because endings, even necessary ones, still hurt. Over the next few weeks, I moved through life, one small task at a time. I opened a new bank account, changed the utilities to my name, took a new schedule at the library, mornings only, so I could pick up the kids myself. Every step felt like reclaiming something. Even the silence of the house started feeling different, less lonely, more peaceful. But Adam didn't make it easy. He started showing up unannounced, bringing flowers, gifts for the kids, sometimes just standing at the door, asking to talk. At first, I let him in. But every time he spoke, his words were empty rehearsals. I could almost see the script forming in his head before he said it. Once, I caught him looking toward the drawer where the notebook used to be. That was when I knew he realized I'd read it all. And in that moment, I saw who he truly was. Not a man racked with guilt, but one terrified of losing control over his story. A month later, his secret life caught up with him. Melissa, the woman he'd been seeing, showed up at his job site. Word spread quickly among the crew. Someone recorded the argument, her shouting that he'd promised to leave his wife, that he'd lied to her too. By evening, the video was on Facebook. By morning, half the town had seen it. When Eli came home from school that day, he said quietly, "Dad looked sad." I knelt beside him and said, "Sometimes people make choices that hurt everyone, Eli. But that doesn't mean we stop being kind." He nodded, and I realized that in all this mess, that's what I wanted my children to remember. Not their... That night, I sat on the porch, a soft breeze brushing my hair. The house behind me was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to scare me, but now felt like peace. I thought about forgiveness, how it isn't a gift for the other person, but for yourself. I had forgiven Adam once because I wanted to save our marriage. Now, I forgave him again, not to fix what he broke, but to free myself from it. When the divorce papers were signed 2 months later, he didn't look me in the eye. He just muttered, "I didn't think you'd actually do it." I smiled faintly. You should have written that one down too. 6 months. That's how long it had been since I'd last called myself Mrs. Bennett. The papers were signed, the names changed, and the dust finally had begun to settle. Some mornings, I'd wake up and forget for a brief, fragile second that everything had changed. I'd half expect to hear Adam in the kitchen, humming as he burned his toast the way he always did. But then I'd open my eyes, see the empty side of the bed, and remember, he was gone. And that was okay. I didn't realize how much of myself I'd lost trying to hold our marriage together until I stopped holding on. Suddenly, I had space to breathe again, really breathe. I joined a local book club, started jogging in the mornings with a woman from work named Rachel, who had the kind of laugh that made you forget your worries. I began painting again, something I hadn't done since college. At first, I painted to feel the silence, but soon, I painted because the silence had started to feel beautiful. Emma and Eli adjusted faster than I did. They still spent weekends with Adam, though I noticed the visits were shorter now. Ellie often came home quiet afterward, while Emma would chatter endlessly about the cat they'd seen at the park or the pancakes they made together. One night, after they'd gone to bed, I found myself scrolling through old photos, our family vacations, birthdays, Christmas mornings. For a while, I let myself cry. Not because I missed him, but because I missed who I thought we were. There's a difference, you know. Missing the illusion hurts more than missing the person. One Saturday morning, I was cleaning out the whole closet when I found the notebook again. It was wedged between old files and a stack of children's art projects. My first instinct was to toss it, but something made me pause. I sat on the floor, sunlight spilling across the pages. As I flipped it open, the handwriting has felt foreign now. The neat, deliberate lines that once carried weight now looked pitiful. I scanned through a few entries before closing it for good. That was when I realized something important. That notebook wasn't just a record of betrayal anymore. It was proof of how far I'd come. So, I put it in a box labeled past, and for the first time, it actually felt like one. A few weeks later, I ran into Adam at the grocery store. He looked older, not in the physical sense, but worn. Like someone who'd spent too long pretending to be fine. We stood there for a moment between aisles of cereal and canned soup. Two people who used to share everything, now struggling to find words. He broke the silence first. "How've you been?" "I'm okay," I said honestly. "You?" He hesitated, trying, I got laid off." I nodded. "I'm sorry to hear that." He looked down, then met my eyes. "You always were stronger than me, Lauren. I just didn't see it then." For a moment, I saw the man I'd once loved, Not the liar, not the stranger, but the boy who used to hold my hand on the walk home from church, laughing at nothing. And in that second, I knew I'd forgiven him completely. But forgiveness doesn't mean invitation. I smiled softly and said, "Take care of yourself, Adam." Then I walked away, and it felt good. By autumn, life had settled into something new, something gentle. The kids and I started a weekend ritual of making pancakes every Sunday morning. Emma always mixed too much sugar. Eli always burned the first batch, and I'd always pretend not to care. Laughter filled the kitchen again. Not the forced kind we used to have when we were trying to hide our pain, but real, messy, joyful laughter. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of myself in the kitchen window, hair messy, hands covered in flour, and I'd think, this is what peace looks like. One evening, Rachel and I went to a small art exhibit downtown. My paintings had been accepted, nothing big, just a local showcase. As people wandered by, stopping to look, I overheard a woman say, "There's something so free about this one." She was talking about the last painting I'd submitted. Soft blues and golds swirling around the faint outline of a woman standing in a doorway, light spilling in. I had called it beginning again. I smiled quietly, because that's what this had all been about. Not endings, but beginnings. That night, after putting the kids to bed, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The air smelled like rain and earth, and the sound of crickets filled the space where silence used to ache. I thought about the notebook again, about how it had once felt like the end of my story. But now, I understood it wasn't the end. It was the turning point, the thing that broke me wide open so the light could finally get in. I whispered into the quiet, "Thank you for the lesson, Adam. And for the first time in a long time, I meant it." Sometimes, the things that break us aren't punishments. They're awakenings. When I found that notebook, I thought it had destroyed me. But really, it set me free. You see, love can blind us, but truth, no matter how painful, always brings light. I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and moving on doesn't mean you never cared. It means you finally decided to care about yourself too. Today, I still keep that notebook in a box, labeled past, not as a wound, but as a reminder that I survived something I once thought would end me. So, to anyone listening who's standing in the ruins of trust, don't rush to rebuild what was broken. Instead, build something new, something that's yours. Would you have forgiven him like I did? Tell me in the comments. And if my story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one. Stories of truth, strength, and the quiet power of starting over.